Okay, this is going to be the first of 10 videos that are going to be on SAT Foundations. And this video is going to be the first one of the series, and it's going to be on the basics. Just a general idea of what the SAT is, why you have to take it, and how it's going to differ from other tests you may have taken in school. So let's start. Why the SAT? Why do we have to take it? Well, there's lots of debate about what the SAT may actually measure. Does it actually measure kind of college success? Does it measure intelligence? Does it measure reasoning skills? Well, no one really knows for sure. There's been so much debate about it. The best we can say for now is the SAT measures essentially what people think it measures. What I mean by this is pretty much the SAT means what people give meaning, what meanings people give to it. For our purposes, we just have to get good at the SAT because it's important for getting into colleges, it's important for scholarship opportunities. So we don't really care about this aspect of the debate, whether it means something about you, who you are. That is irrelevant, and frankly, I don't think it even means anything anyway. We just have to care about doing the work necessary to do well on the test. And that's really what it's all about. It's all about, in the end, hours. How many hours in a day, or how many hours in a week or in a month do you put into practice? And not just regular practice, but what we're going to call deliberate practice. And this is a very focused, very organized kind of practice that's not simply just kind of doing practice tests and then grading them and seeing how well you do. It's going to be really looking closely in on your kind of process and how you actually do the questions, how you approach the test, and going to be kind of working on your skills and techniques from there. So, what's on the SAT? Well, there are 10 sections total on the test. There are 3 math sections. Okay, there's a 25-minute 20-question section. There's a 25-minute 18-question section and a 20-minute 16-question section. So there's 3 math. There are 3 critical reading, I should say. And that's a 25-minute 24-question section, a 25-minute 24-question section, and a 20-minute 19-question section. There are 3 writing sections. Now this contains, of course, 1 essay, which is 25 minutes, and it also contains a long grammar, which is 25 minutes, 35 questions, and it also contains a little short, itty-bitty section, which is 10 minutes and 14 questions. Now, I told you there are 10. So far, we count 9, right? There's 3, 3, and 3. We need 10. What's the last one? Well, the last one is called the experimental section. Now, this could be either an extra math, an extra reading, or an extra grammar, big grammar section, the 25-minute section. You don't know until you get there on test day. Now, what's the purpose of this? We're going to be talking a lot more about this later, but basically they use this to test future questions for future exams. They can't use you guys as guinea pigs, so they're going to test questions here. And the thing about this section is it doesn't count towards your score. And we're going to talk about score right now. So really, these 3 are the only ones that combine to form your score. Now, what about the scores? Well, we'll pull down this conversion table for a minute. Each section, the critical reading, the math, and the writing, are scored from, essentially, 200 to 800. You can see here at the top of each one of these scoring tables, 800 or 80 in this case, but don't worry about that, it's 800. It's at the top of each. And near the bottom is 200. Right? Now, as you can see, you'd have to get a -3 raw points to get a 200. So this is essentially a 0. So people who say, oh, if you write your name down, you get 200 points, it doesn't really mean anything. 200 is essentially a 0. So each section is graded 200 to 800, and the average in general, now this changes year by year, and it's actually been going down for the past few years. The average is, we'll just say, around 500 per section is the average. So if you take all the students who take the exam in a year, you lump them all together, approximately half will get this score or below, and half will get this score and above, essentially. Okay, so and then obviously if there's 500 per section, the average combined score is 1,500. Though sometimes you'll see schools asking for 1,000 as the average score, or as kind of the desired score. This, as we'll talk about in later videos, this is including math and the reading, but not the writing. This writing is a little bit sketchy, and we'll talk about that in the writing section in a later video. So one thing, how do they get these scores? Well, for every question you get right, you get 1 point, and we'll talk much more about scoring in the next video. But for every question you get a point, and then basically they just look at a table like this and say, okay, Johnny got a 48 questions right on the math, that gives him a 720, or Bobby got 25 questions right on the reading, that gives you a 470, and so on, right? So they just kind of compare. As for the essay, we'll talk about the essay, but it's essentially the same idea. You're going to have the essay plus the multiple choice questions are going to give you this, what would be an 800 to 200 score. So now let's just talk about the 5 ways that the SAT is different than most tests you've taken while you've been in school. If you just to start out, if you approach this test like every other test you do in school, you've got a problem, and you're going to find out why in a second. So the first is that it's graded on a bell curve, okay, or it's, in other words, curved, or it's a normative test. That means if you took all the scores of the exam, that all the SATs that people took in a year, from 200 at the bottom to 800 at the top, College Board, the people who make the test, want the results to look, that's not very good, to look something like this, okay? Where most of the scores are bunched here in the middle, right? Average being 500. Most of the scores bunched here in the middle, and then relatively few people down out towards the tails. So the tails both of the really super low scores and the really super high scores. So this is what they want. They want to get this even distribution. So what does this mean for you? Well, generally in school, you're really competing against yourself. So it's called a criterion reference test, I believe. Right? Everyone could get 100%. And that would be great. That's kind of the goal, is to get every student to know everything, to master it. And really, essentially, what you're doing is you're competing in school against your teacher, or really against yourself. But on this test, you're not only competing against yourself to a certain extent, but you're competing against your peers, right? You've got to beat, if you want to get, say, 600, which maybe something like that, you'll want to beat all of these people. So it's more of a competition than it is a simple straight-up test. So that's the first thing you got to realize, and that's where the experimental section comes in. Remember before I mentioned that experimental section, they need to test questions so they can kind of distribute those questions into difficulty levels and therefore get this smooth curve that they're looking for in order to sort students. Because remember, the main thing that this test is trying to do is sort students for colleges, right? They want to know who has what score, so therefore they've got to sort. All right. Second difference between the SAT and a high school test is content. Now, granted, this test tests content. Obviously, it has to. It tests math. It tests vocab, grammar, reading skills, if you can call that content. But the thing is that really content is not the main thing that they're testing. That's really the confusing thing, especially with the math section. We look at the math section and we say, oh, that's just like a math section math test I take in school. Well, no. I mean, on the surface it is. On the surface, these sections all appear like maybe a test you could take in school. But the problem is that when you actually look at the test closely and look at what they're actually trying to focus on, you'll realize that content is really the thing that hides what it is that they're truly testing. And, well, what are they truly testing? Well, we'll talk about that in later videos, but content is essentially the vehicle by which they can do that. Number 3 is time. More so than probably any test you'll take in school, time is a huge issue. Now, you have 3 hours and 45 minutes total. So the first thing that's different about this is that this is a long time. This is probably longer than most tests you'll take. Maybe APs are about the same time length. I don't think they're 3 hours, but this is probably the longest test you'll take. And the other thing is you've got to sit there for the full time because you don't have 3 hours and 45 minutes to finish the test. As I showed you above, you've got a 25-minute section, you've got a 20-minute section. This time is broken down into sections where, first, you've got to sit in that desk for this full time. You can't leave early like you can for other tests. And second, once you do, say, section 1, for this 25 minutes, you technically, you can't, it's cheating, you can't go back to section 1. You got to work on section 2 and then section 3. So you really have to not only deal with the really long amount of time that you've got to deal with here, that you got to sit in that chair, but you've also got to at the same time manage the very chaos of dealing with the limited time you get in each section. So there's kind of a paradox or contradiction here. You've got a lot of time, almost too much, where you're kind of getting bored, but at the same time you've got not enough time for the actual individual work that need to get done. So balancing the issue of time and pacing yourself is such a key strategy. You need to know your plan before you go into the test on how you're going to approach the sections, and we'll talk about this a lot more in later videos. Number 4, time management. This is kind of what I was mentioning above, where for most people, starting from number 1 and then going through to number 20 in order is going to be the losing strategy. You're going to want to be much more particular and much more focused and much more specific about how you approach each section. You need a game plan for each section before you go into it in order to maximize your score, and we'll talk about that too. Finally, the most important difference is guessing and scoring. Now, I'm going to leave this to the next video because it's so critical. But that has been the basics of the SAT Foundations. Please rate, comment, and subscribe to my channel. There'll be many more videos coming out about SAT and other topics. Also check out my website, reasonprep.com. There you can find more videos, more information, and also information on how to work with me either one-on-one or in groups, in person or online. I am taking students at this point. So let's go on to the next video.